means to be made in the image of God. And we've been dealing with the hard questions like, how can a loving God allow terrible things to happen? And why would we ever serve a God who wants to be worshiped? But today we've come to a crossroads because we've stepped into this building to celebrate that moment in time when all of history, all of the mistakes, and all of the pain, and all of the failures added up to the most beautiful moment the world has ever known. And that's the truth that we rest on today. The living God we serve is the God who says, it doesn't matter what happened before. It doesn't matter that the people of Israel rejected God. God's plan still stood. Just like it doesn't matter if you've walked away from God or if you've decided to live outside of God's blessings. None of that matters because God's plan still stands for you. If God could look at all of history from the corruption of Eden, that first temple where God and humanity walked together, where we decided to reject God's rule and try to define good and evil for ourselves, and God could watch every failure after that and respond by sending Jesus so that we could wield our angry, selfish justice and crucify God on earth. And God could craft all of that evil into the sequence of events that would rescue us all. If God could do that, take all of the evil that humanity could muster and save the world with it, what can God do with our failures? What can God do with the mess that you hand him today? You see, every single one of us sitting here is sitting here with a secret pain or secret doubts or secret failures, myself included. And this is the victory. I mean, sure, we can preach the resurrection story like it's a party. We can teach that Jesus dealt a blow to the devil like it's some kind of pay-per-view boxing match. And I suppose that we can rejoice because we get to see the bad guy get what's coming to him. And that isn't wrong. When Jesus stepped out of the grave, death lost its grip. But I think that the real victory goes deeper than our need for escape. Knowing that we'll see eternity as a gift so profound that words fail us. But if that's the only part of the story we connect with, we're missing out. If we've learned anything over the past few months, it's that real victory is intensely real. And it doesn't wait until we breathe our last breath before calling us to more. You see, our God doesn't stop when we're no longer hungry or no longer hurting or no longer in pain. Our God doesn't stop until that pain is turned into something better than we could have ever imagined. Our God doesn't stop until that pain is redeemed, and not just for us, but for everyone we come into contact with. So this morning we're going to be turning to the book of John to see how the story of redemption plays out for all of us. And the book of John is remarkable in that it's the story of Jesus as told by a pastor, as someone who's gifted with the burden of a broken heart. And because the story is told by a disciple who walked alongside the people placed in his care, when we open this book, Jesus' care and equipping of the flock is what comes to life for us. So this morning we're going to be ending our sermon series. We're going to be ending our sermon series. What? You got that, huh? Oh, I forgot my clicker. Sorry. We're going to be ending our sermon series with the story of our Lord, his death and resurrection, but more specifically today, what that victory means for us in the here and now. Because we've traveled this journey, if we've learned one thing, it's despite our failings, God is determined to use humanity to bring about restoration and healing to our broken world. And because God has ordained it, this story isn't complete without us. Most of us know the story of Jesus, how he came to the world to fulfill Israel's covenant with God because humanity couldn't uphold their end of the bargain. We're always going to fail at justice and love and peace because we always go to the wrong source for power. So God sent his son to be the human who could stand in our place and fulfill the covenant. But when Jesus arrived, he wasn't the king they expected. He didn't wield a sword and demand that the Roman oppressors bow to the true king. He looked to a different kind of power. Instead of trying to appear successful, he spoke of how the meek would inherit the earth, and how the poor were really the rich, and how the ones who granted mercy would know mercy in their lives. Jesus taught that those who brought peace would be called the children of God, and the people hated him for it. They crucified him because he wouldn't be the king they thought they needed. But it is that very act of betrayal that sets the stage for the introduction to God's kingdom and the final blow to the devastation of living in a world where humanity is constantly manipulated into accepting the tragic future that Satan has in store for us. The future that lies to us and tells us that this pain is all there is and it's all there ever will be. The lie that tells us that this is the best it's ever going to get. And with that lie, the accompanying whisper of false hope that maybe if we get more, or we are more, or we do more, then we'll be able to forget the nagging dread that sucks the air out of our rooms at night and calls us to find ever more dangerous ways to numb the pain. So today we look up and we see an empty cross, and we know that because Jesus lives and death has been defeated, so will we live. Because of the cross, I can be free. Because of the cross, I can reject the tragedy and walk into the promise that this is only the beginning, and we have cause to celebrate because the story of death that has been graffitied over our identities as image bearers of the Creator God has been washed clean, and today is a new day. So today we're going to turn to the book of John, to chapter 20. After the Friday of pain and death and devastation, and after the Saturday of stillness and quiet and sorrow, and the raw fear that the soldiers would find the rest of Jesus' followers. And we're going to turn to the early morning hours of Sunday. And it's here, in the cool quiet, that Mary Magdalene stands at the entrance of a tomb with no stone in front of it and no body inside of it, weeping with the trauma of having watched as her friend and teacher was beaten, mocked, a crown of thorns pressed into his head, and crucified because the crowds couldn't see past their expectations to accept the miracle that had stood before them. In this moment, the other disciples had left and she was alone. John 20, 11 through 18 says, "But Mary stood weeping outside the tomb. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb, and she saw two angels in white sitting where the body of Jesus had been lying, one at the head and the other at the feet. They said to her, 'Woman, why are you weeping?' She said to them, 'They have taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they've laid him.' When she'd said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to her, 'Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you looking for?' Supposing him to be the gardener, she said to him, 'Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you've laid him, and I'll take him away.' Jesus said to her, 'Mary.' And she turned and said to him in Hebrew, 'Rabboni,' which means teacher. Jesus said to her, 'Do not hold on to me, because I have not yet ascended to the Father. But go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God.' Mary Magdalene went and announced to the disciples, 'I have seen the Lord.' And she told them that he had said these things to her. So Mary, through her tears, peers into an empty tomb. And here we're given a glimpse of what she sees. 2 angels in white sitting on either side of an empty stone. Now, because we've read through the beginning of the Bible, we know another flat surface with 2 angels on either side. The mercy seat where God dwells in the temple. The ark that carried God's presence when Israel would move from place to place. And so we see immediately that God is here, that those boundaries between heaven and earth are melting away. And maybe most importantly, where death once had dominion, God now reigns. Even in the darkest place, the place we've been taught to understand as the place of no hope, the place of our greatest pain and loss, this is where God sets up his throne. Mary, through her tears, looks at that place of hopelessness and sees God's kingdom breaking through. And the angels speak to her. And we know from other places in the Bible that this happens. The angels speak when humanity absolutely fails to understand the monumental events taking place. For Mary, still stunned by her trauma and grief, they ask why she's weeping. And her response is a human one. They had taken her Lord. But before they could answer her concern, she turns and Jesus asks her the same question. Through her tears and pain, she doesn't recognize him. That is until he calls her name. And I want us to stop here, because this is the point where we realize that we have a choice. There are 2 realities that are available to all of us. We can either see the physical that exists in front of us and demands our attention, or we can listen to God calling us and lift the dark veil that obscures the reality that holds eternal significance. And when we peer through our pain to the evidence of God's presence, we see that the reality is that we're called by name. We're loved. We're valued. And God has a purpose for us. And we know this because as soon as that veil of tragedy is lifted, as soon as she knows every word of her that her Lord spoke was true, she's commissioned to deliver the greatest message the world has ever known. And we shouldn't be surprised that God chose a woman with a tragic past and no wealth or no power to proclaim the truth that the barrier between heaven and earth, the bars that held humanity captive to death, had been dissolved. We shouldn't be surprised because this was Jesus' entire message. His example, everything he did and spoke of, and the people he spent time with should point us to this truth and the fact that the God of victory is the same God who rejects the proud and chooses to work through the broken. If you came here today broken and sad and mourning, then you're the one that Jesus has been waiting for. Just like Mary, he wants to pull the veil back to reveal that the pain that we trudge through, the pain that's pointless to the world, has purpose in the kingdom that's revealed when you hear that still small voice whisper your name. Then, when we're still in John chapter 20, Jesus appears to the disciples, but there was one missing from the group when Jesus entered that locked room full of disciples who were fearing for their lives. In John 20, 24 to, I didn't hit that last one, sorry. John 20, 24 to 29, we read, "But Thomas, who was called the twin, one of the 12, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, 'We have seen the Lord.' But he said to them, 'Unless I see the mark of the nails in his hands, and put my finger in the mark of the nails, and my hand in his side, I will not believe.'" Yuck. A week later, his disciples were again in the house, and Jesus was with them. Although the doors were shut, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hand. Reach out your hand and put it in my side. Do not doubt, but believe. Thomas answered him, my Lord and my God. Jesus said to him, have you believed because you've seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have come to believe. Absolutely. Who's the ones who haven't seen and have come to believe? There's so many readings of this scripture and Thomas's personality, but most all recognize that Thomas was one of the 12 who had the most doubts. In fact, the picture painted of Thomas that's in the other Gospels makes him seem pretty pessimistic. And unfortunately, for a long time, really unfortunately, for a long time in the modern church, someone who's had questions has often been seen as someone who lacks faith. And as a result, many of us have grown up in environments where questioning the Bible and questioning Christian practices and doctrines and traditions has been discouraged or worse. But we see the opposite happen here. The story opens with the disciples, minus Thomas, hiding behind a locked door. In fact, in the span of just a few verses, closed doors are mentioned twice. But did you notice that closed door isn't a hindrance for God? And this even extends to the doors that are closed by our fear, doesn't it? The disciples were afraid, and suddenly Jesus is in their midst. God isn't slowed down by our fear because fear has no place when the God who created us and loves us beyond our comprehension determines that it's time to bring peace to our hearts. You see, before the story, when Jesus appeared to the disciples without Thomas, and they told Thomas said that he wouldn't believe unless he could put his fingers in the places where the nails pierced his Lord's hand. That's a weird request. So Jesus walks in, past the barriers that had been raised, and tells Thomas, put your finger here. It's okay to laugh. Right. I know that comedy isn't really our go-to for understanding the Bible, but this is pretty funny. And it's powerful all at once. And I can't help but wonder what it must have been. What must it have been like to look into the eyes of a person who knew everything about you, even the doubts you hid or the ones that you expressed when he wasn't there, and then have that person meet you at that point of need with no condemnation and nothing but a gentle reminder of who you were created to be? You see, Thomas brought his doubts. Jesus brought reassurance. Jesus met Thomas at his need, just like Jesus does for us today. Then Jesus commissioned this man, a man who represents to a large extent the people who fill our churches today, who've learned not to ask questions or they might be judged. He commissioned him along with the other disciples to spread the good news that the way the world works has been changed forever. The beauty here is that Jesus shows us that our doubts and our questions are as much a part of our path to purpose as Mary's pain was. Because the God who sees pain and responds with comfort is the same God who sees doubts and responds with reassurance. Søren Kierkegaard, a Danish theologian who lived in the 1800s, reminds us, only he who doubts can truly believe. Think about that for a minute. So Jesus, having just defeated death and knowing that this message of hope and peace and victory had to be spread, chose Mary and Thomas, two of the most unlikely people. But there's one more person that Jesus must interact with, and that's Peter. Peter had walked with Jesus, ate with Jesus, watched as Jesus healed the sick and raised the dead. He defended Jesus. And after Jesus had been arrested, he denied ever knowing him. But then Jesus met them at the edge of the sea. They were fishing, and Peter jumped into the water to meet Jesus because he didn't want to wait for the boat to get to the shore. They sat down to cook some of the fish they'd caught, and John 21:15-17 tells us, when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my lambs." A second time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him the third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter felt hurt because he had said it to him for the third time. He had said it to him for the third time, "Do you love me?" And Peter, said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." And Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep." From Luke's account of the days after the resurrection, we know that this is the second time that Jesus and Peter have met. We don't know what forgiveness or reconciliation might have taken place in that first encounter, but here we watch as something profound happens. A lot of scholars have spent a lot of time studying the different forms of the word love here that Jesus uses. They've also spent some time talking about lambs and sheep, but that really isn't the point here. You see, when Peter had denied ever knowing Jesus, he did so 3 times. He answered the same question 3 times with the same betrayal. So here, Jesus, the one who put our mistakes to rest, publicly reinstates him to his purpose with this one question asked 3 times. Do you love me? Then feed my sheep. Tend to the people I have put in your lives. Jesus doesn't tell Peter that he must make amends. Jesus doesn't tell Peter that he must have a certain kind of attitude. Jesus doesn't correct Peter with a lecture. Jesus just asks Peter if he loves him, and then Jesus commissions him. And maybe that's you today. You've denied Christ. Maybe with your words, maybe not with your words, maybe with your actions. And you know you got to fix it because you're sitting here today with your heart in your throat and you're not sure what to do about it because it feels like such a long way back. Your life doesn't look like the life of a Christian. You know your attitude doesn't match up with where it should be. Maybe no one in your circle of friends would describe you as a person of love or joy or peace or patience or kindness or goodness or faithfulness or self-control. But Jesus doesn't care about yesterday. Because yesterday was the grave. And today, that grave has been defeated. You might have walked into this place with Mary's sorrow and trauma and tragedy, or you might have stepped into the sanctuary dragging Thomas's doubts, or maybe you came here today being chased by the evidence of your failures. It doesn't matter what you brought here with you today. What matters is that you leave here knowing that you're loved and that there is a purpose for your life and that you are called by the King. And maybe just as importantly, that is it's those exact tragedies, those doubts, and those failures that make you suitable to be the one who speaks peace and cares for those God has placed in your lives. You see, when we make the decision to try to make it through our lives on our own, and we decide that this world is all there is, and we deny that there can be a spiritual world that works underneath the one that we can see, we become enslaved to our circumstances. We think we're breaking free from the church or religion or things that want to hold us back, but really we're like a horse with blinders on, allowing ourselves only to see what's right in front of our noses, because if we widen our view, then we might be overwhelmed. Because we're just trying to make it through. But Jesus rejected that narrow view, and Jesus taught. He taught us that the freedom of knowing that nothing that the world throws at us can hold us down, because there's an entire reality that's just beyond our perception. And this reality changes meaningless suffering and trials and hardships into something that God uses to make the lives of the people around you better. You see, when we decide to take the blinders off, everything changes and we change. And do we get this right all of the time? No. Does the church get this right all the time? No. Now, don't get me wrong. The church has done amazing things. The people of the church has done amazing things. We've talked about it before. It's the church who created hospitals and schools for more than just the wealthy. And those believers set the stage for understanding that every person is valuable. And it was the early church who were the first to invite slaves and free people to share at the same table. But the church is made up of people like you and me, people who fail. So the church isn't perfect, just like we aren't perfect. Historically, if we're being honest, we've used religion to try to control people. We've used it to grasp for earthly power. We've used it to make ourselves feel superior. We've used it to try to make the people who don't agree with us be quiet. And we've embraced our culture's version of Christianity where success is defined by numbers and money and the kind of power that Jesus outright rejected and went to the cross because of it. The truth is, we get this wrong all the time. But rejecting Jesus because of the hurt we've experienced at the hands of the church is still putting on blinders. Because Jesus came for you and for me and for the people sitting next to us. And the true power of the church isn't in the organization. It's in the individuals who have been transformed and who will listen to God's voice and spread the news that this world isn't all there is, that we can be saved from the lie that there is no meaning. The real church, guys, is full of people who proclaim that there is hope and there is peace and there is joy because we serve a God who seeks out the broken and the traumatized and the confused and the doubting and the angry and those of us who have failed. And it's through those testimonies that the humble message of the cross is made clear. So wherever you are in a relationship with Jesus, whatever brought you here today, I hope that what you take away is that those burdens, if you give them to God, if you lay them at the foot of the cross, are what God will use to empower you to live a life that isn't about the endless treadmill of getting more or being more or working more, but a life of purpose that demonstrates to others that they don't have to be limited by the narrow blinders that our world wants to convince us are the key to freedom. We stand here today, a group of people who know that when we say that we have been saved, it means more than a trip to heaven at the end. It means more than a trip to heaven at the end. It means that we know we were created in the image of God and that we were intended to be mirrors of God's goodness to the world, but we decided that we wanted to make our own rules, so we painted over that image with images of other gods, the gods of pride and greed and vanity, and eventually the mirror looked a little bit more like us, like an image of ourselves. But when we say we're saved, it means that we see the new path that Jesus created, the path that scrapes away the gods of success and wealth with Jesus' humble message that blazed a way to the cross that humanity constructed because we wanted the king who reflected our culture more than a king who loved unconditionally. When we say we're saved, we join the others in the world who see evidence of God in nature and in each other, and we work to show others this bigger picture because it's more beautiful than they know. When we say that we've been saved, we're saying that we trust God to look at us like he looked at Mary and Thomas and Peter, that we have faith that God will do more than see the hurt and the doubt and the mistakes, and instead will turn those into beauty and use them so that others can find hope. That's what we mean when we say we've been saved. And when we say that we hope others will be saved, we're not just saying that we hope that they'll spend an eternity with God, but we're saying that we hope they'll see the seeds of eternity in the gift of every day and the promise in living with the reality that the grave has once and for all been defeated, and Jesus stands there calling us by name with hope in his hands. Worship team, if you want to come up. We hope that they'll know Jesus, so they can know that they are washed clean of their pain and doubt and failure and those things that want to hold them back. Those things that want to hold them back have been transformed into the mediums that God uses to bring redemption to the earth. The mediums that the Creator God uses to bring redemption to the earth. You see, for those of us who are gathered as the church, we're here because we're a group of people who pool their time and talent and resources, the gift that God has given for the express purpose of demonstrating that Jesus' countercultural kingdom is already active, and it's the river that flows just below the surface. We just have to look for it in the unexpected places. I invite you to stand if you can. You see, we can see the kingdom break through in the eyes of the hurting. We see the kingdom break through in the patience of a father who bends down and helps his son tie his shoes for the 150th time. We see Jesus' kingdom break through to the surface when we serve meals, when we donate money to a school fundraiser, and when we smile at a stranger. And we see it most dramatically when we allow God to use our pain or our doubts or our failures to transform us into the kind of people who can show others the way. So this leaves us with a question that takes us all the way back to the beginning. What could God do with the pain or the worry that you carried into this place today? Because that's your part of the redemption story, where God sets up his throne in the situation that has been your grave and says, this is going to be the source of light for the people that you care for. The grave holds no uncertainty or pain or failure for us, because the kingdom has come. And just like Jesus said, it is finished.